Now here's CNJFO Communications Director, Theresa Inacker.
I'm a mom and a gun owner in New Jersey, and I like to trap shoot, and I have handguns, I have several modern sporting rifles, you name it, I like to do it. And I've been an activist for, better part of maybe 6 or 7 years now, working with various groups. Rosie's been a wonderful mentor to me. He's taken me hunting, pheasant hunting. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have had exposure to that because nobody else in my family really hunts. So I really am one of those people that's benefited from that camaraderie and that fellowship and the mentorship that you experience in the 2A community here in New Jersey. So we're all in the same boat together, which, isn't a good one, and it's good that we stick together like that. So as a mom, I like to be able to defend myself. Of course, I can't do that outside the home here in New Jersey, but I do want to be able to defend myself inside the home, which I definitely do. I'm a shameless mom who's plugging for Girl Scout cookies. I brought some with me since I'm a Girl Scout leader. So I'm a mom 24/7, so it never ends.
I told her to bring it.
Nora's at fault. She told me to bring them. So
Okay, I want some.
thank you. I do have those later. So I am an attorney in New Jersey and New York. I can't give you legal advice, but I can give you a little bit of a breakdown on some of the constitutional arguments that have been made on the most recent magazine ban. This is Murphy's magazine reduction bill. So I'd like to explain what some of those arguments are, the constitutional arguments. There are Second Amendment arguments, but there are some other ones as well that are interesting. I love the Constitution. I went to Seton Hall Law School, and I was a managing editor of the Constitutional Law Journal there. So I've been in love with the Constitution for decades now. And this is the perfect way to practice it. So let's talk about the Murphy magazine ban. As you know, the law passed in June, and what happened was it reduced the limit of lawful possession of rounds in a magazine down to 10. We were at 15 rounds, which is already a reduced amount. We were at that rate for about 30 years, I believe, and that's already a reduced amount for what is common in the rest of the country. A standard capacity would be 30 rounds elsewhere. So there are actually about 60 million standard capacity magazines in the United States, and that does become actually a very important figure later on when you start to understand what common use is in firearms, and why we contend that this magazine ban violates the Constitution. So we had about 6 months to comply. They gave us 180 days to comply, but the Association of Rifle and Pistol Clubs here in New Jersey, they filed federal litigation in the New Jersey District Court, and they asked for an injunction. So, they wanted an injunction, give us some more time, give us an answer so that people don't have to dispose of their property. They're lawfully purchased property, okay? If you have these magazines and you're somebody like in this room, of course you did it lawfully. You went through the process. You had your background checks, the whole 9 yards, right? Just like Rosie says, all that incrementalism creeps up. So your lawfully purchased magazines, you have 6 months to figure out what to do with it. So ANJRPC filed the litigation asking the courts to intervene so that people wouldn't have to go through expending money, right? Money on top of money. You paid money to purchase the magazine. Now you have to pay money to either have it modified, by an FFL or gunsmith, store it lawfully somewhere. So there are various options on their website. If you're curious about how to comply and what qualifies as qualifying, you can go onto their landing page of ANJRPC and see the list of how to comply. So, they gave us 6 months, which wasn't a heck of a lot of time. A little bit of legal gymnastics back and forth between the U.S. District Court and then to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. And eventually what happened was 5 days before the deadline, the Third Circuit Court of Appeals rendered their decision. And they said, nope, we're not going to stop the magazine ban. You have 5 days to comply. So as you can imagine, we had been preparing people hey, get ready, because they don't have an answer yet. This isn't looking good. Nobody's really been quite favorable to the gun owner in the state legally. So you need to start preparing and thinking about what you're going to do. So 5 days before the deadline, of course, they come out and they say, you need to do something. And so some people scrambled, some people, your options are surrender them, which I have never heard of anybody who actually did that. Get them modified, store them in state, store them out of state, that kind of thing. So that's not where it's going to end. At this point, CNJFO, they did file for a larger panel of the court at the Third Circuit to hear the case. The denial in December was just a 3-judge panel. 2 of the judges were Obama-appointed judges, and they went against us. The third judge had a fiery dissent, which I think was like over 20 pages long, and that judge was appointed by President Trump, and of course agreed with our side. So at this point, we do have some disagreement there. CNJFO asked for the full court to hear it at the Third Circuit level, and they just said no recently. So there's some other steps, but they say they vow to pursue it to the Supreme Court. So this will be very interesting because it's a really great case. At this point, I think as crazy as the lawmakers are going to get, and as burdensome and as oppressive as they want to be, the better, because it won't pass scrutiny. It gets to a point where rights have to be balanced, against how oppressive the government is being on a person. And so the crazier they are, I think the more likely it is to be overturned. So that's just my personal opinion. And at this point, it looks pretty shady. So I can give you a few of the arguments that were made, constitutional arguments that were made. Basically 3 main grounds. One is that it violates the Second Amendment. The second one is that it violates the Fifth Amendment right to no takings without just compensation. And the third main argument was an equal protection argument under the 14th Amendment. So I could just break down a little of those each, so that you know what's going on and you have an idea of what's at stake out there. So as for the Second Amendment violation, there is a seminal case called Heller versus D.C., District of Columbia. It really is the seminal case that's really set forth that we have an individual right to own firearms. It's an individual right, not a right as a militia. A lot of times your liberal friends might argue with you. You're not in a militia. It's all about the militia. It's outdated. It doesn't mean that. So under Heller and some other cases, they've already settled that. That's not even a dispute anymore. So it's an individual right. They also determined pretty much that you have a right to own a handgun for self-defense, that handguns are arms under the Second Amendment, so they are protected, which sounds kind of simple and obviously no-brainer, but when you're dealing with courts, you never know. And they've also determined that magazines would be considered arms and protected. So why is that important? Well, it's important because, remember we talked about those 60 million standard capacity magazines out there? Well, if some arm is in common use, it's protected. So in New Jersey, here we want to say, oh, you can't have anything over 10 rounds, and this is very reasonable. And the argument under Heller would be, I'm sorry, these are in common use. There's 60 million of these in this country. How can you say that's not common use? And of course, they do take the argument against that, and I guess it's something that will continue to be argued all the way up to the Supreme Court. So that was one of the common use arguments. Basically, they were saying that the other standard use would be that when you purchase a particular rifle, like a modern sporting rifle, America's rifle, the most common rifle, it does come as a standard with mags that are over 10. So this is not out of the ordinary, So if it just kind of seems like common sense to us, I know, right? But it's not common sense to them. Handguns, again, are permitted to be used for self-defense purposes.